really great thing to learn how to do when you want to learn how to draw is to start with the basics. And a lot of people don't, I know they don't want to, but you need to. And it's something that I go back to a lot, and a lot of artists do. Whenever you're first starting out, you want to learn your basic shapes, right? So obviously there's a crappy drawn box. Obviously there's a square, right? A crappy one, but it's a square nonetheless. That's not important. When you're drawing really basic shapes, normally what people will do when they draw a box is, and they want to create a three-dimensional box, is they will do one of these. I'm pretty sure everybody knows how to do this. And then if you want to shade it to kind of create the effect that it's a box, right? That's considered to be an isometric cube, meaning that it's the same in all sides, regardless of your perspective. Perspective doesn't work that way. So what you want is, let's just imagine there's a dot back here. This is the horizon line. What you want to do is try to connect these lines back to this point and then draw a line back here. Something like this will create the effect that this is actually a perspective cube. So, you know, there's a person standing here looking directly at the face of that cube. And if you erase all this stuff away, it creates the effect that it's a cube. Very simple. So then if we do the same thing for, say, it's harder to do with the circle. And that's kind of the trick, though. That's why you go back to these basics. If you do the same thing, let's start with a cylinder just for simplicity. You know, cylinder, if you're looking at it from an orthographic point of view, if you've ever played old video games like Asteroids, Super Mario Brothers, I'm talking the NES version, Pac-Man, any of that stuff, that's considered to be an orthographic view because everything looks the same regardless of where you are on the screen. There's no perspective, right? It's a two-dimensional plane. Everything's the same. There are no walls, if you will. Like, say, if you're playing like old Legend of Zelda, you have a cube, and you'll, like, A Link to the Past has this kind of perspective. And then you have the doors, right? That's more like a, that's still an orthographic view, but it's a pseudo three-dimensional view, so that you can see your character standing in the middle. You can go this way, whatever. He's still only moving in 2 dimensions for the most part. They do have ledges that he can jump on, but that's not the point. He looks the same regardless of where he's at in the world. With cubes, if you make a cylinder, you know, a square is just an orthographic view of a cube, depending, right? So if you erase that edge of the cube, you just have a square. And the same could be said of, say, a cylinder. And a pyramid is a triangle. If you're looking at it dead on with no perspective, right? But in order to create, say this is the horizon line, the dot back here, perspective, you know, you have like top of a house or a tent. And if this is a cube and not a cylinder, it could be, right? So it could be like this. I'm not paying attention to my horizon line. This. And then you have this one. So the further away it gets from that perspective point back here, the flatter the lines start to look, because when you can see like how that works. So the further out it goes, the flatter the walls will look to the person who's from the angle that you're looking at it from. So if it is a cylinder and you're looking at it straight like this, this is an orthographic view of a cylinder. It looks like a rectangle. Now, what's interesting is if you were to actually draw in a 3D, usually what you'll see people do is they'll draw an oval and then another oval, and then they'll connect the lines. The problem with that, again, is that this and this have the same surface area from the perspective you're in. That's an orthographic perspective. The issue with that is the further away you are from that point. See, because this, if we draw this down, this is going to get, how do I draw this better? If you draw it from the top and you draw a cylinder like this, and then like this, and then this, you know, these are different perspectives of this cylinder top here. the more you start to look at the top of a can, if you will, like a can of soda or something. That's a tab. Let's pretend the bottom is going to be less skewed from your perspective, depending on how you're looking at it. The closer it gets to the center of your vision, the less stretched out that cylinder at the top here becomes. A cylinder, if you were looking dead on, like I said, it can look like a rectangle. But obviously that's not how you're looking at most cylinders. A glass might look like something like this. And obviously, see how that looks? That looks like it's upside down. So here's the trick to learning how to, let's just do it this way. Beginner practice boxes. Okay. So instead of drawing a box in a box with the one where you draw behind, what you should do, if you want to do that, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just make sure that the box is smaller. If the box is smaller, it'll force perspective. Like that. Obviously, it's not a perfect box. And then for shading, you can heavy shade one side, light shade the other. And then you can pretend that there's a light source in the front, and it's only really kind of illuminating this side, partially illuminating that side, and obscuring this side completely. Which means there should be some kind of a shadow behind it. And that'll give you an idea of how to draw that. So draw your box or your square, and then draw a smaller square, ever so slightly smaller behind it, and connect the dots. And this should give you the perspective that you need, so that if you were to draw this off into the distance, helps if you draw a straight line. These lines are not going to be parallel. They're going to converge as they go further away from you, and then eventually they merge at a point back there in the distance. And then the same thing should happen for these, should go, it's way out there somewhere, eventually these lines should merge. So they are parallel, but in perspective, they don't look parallel. So yeah, draw your square first, then you can draw your smaller square, then you can draw your lines, and then just to focus on shading different sides, different intensities, and try to keep in mind where the light source is at. Say the light source is coming from this way. That's a terrible light. And then if it were coming from this way and it's shining, say, the bottom of this, and you're getting some diffuse lighting, some indirect lighting here, and the shadow more or less should come off the back side of that. It gives you an idea of like how things should be. Something like this. It gives you an idea of where the light is going. And it doesn't have to be perfect. The idea is just practice. Just to get an idea of how the light should be. Anyway, so you get different kinds of shapes and stuff that way. So same thing, learn shading and lighting for different things. So say you take a triangle and you want to make it a pyramid. Then the lighting could be coming down, say, from this way. And it could be shining on that side. And diffuse lighting could be hitting this side. And no light on this side. And maybe no light on the back side. So then you just shade that out. Boom. It looks like a pyramid. The hardest one to do, though, in my opinion, is the circle. The sphere, when you first start out. Because we always want to draw... We want to draw a sphere. Or a circle, an egg, whatever it is. It doesn't have to be perfect. Let's make this a little smaller. One day I'll be able to draw a circle, I swear. All right, let's just pretend that that's a sphere. Okay. So the one of the things to do is that if a light source is coming down, say from over here, and let's pretend the light is just like focused. It's a focal light, focal point light kind of thing on that one spot. You could do that and make it look like an olive, right? But if it's, let's say it's a pool ball or something and that's shiny and whatever, and that's kind of diffuse, it's an opaque shade. But if it's not, let's say it's overexposed, what you can actually do is create the effect of, you want to still have that impression that there's a ball there. Let's say it's like this. And again, if it's overexposed, this is hard to do with this eraser. If you're using a pencil and paper, it's much easier to do because you can just smudge it. Let me find my smudgy smudge. So you can do this with your finger on paper. See, that creates more the effect that there's like a soft, direct light on it. And by doing that, you can create the impression that the ball has been drawn. But this is more rendering than drawing specifically. But, you know, shading techniques and stuff. So that starts to become more realistic because lighting is softer than what we usually think of it when we're drawing. But you do one of these numbers. Just has to be a close approximation. Doesn't have to be exactly right. And that usually gives the effect that that's some kind of thing sitting on a table or something, like it's a ball. It could be anything. It could be a baseball. It could be a ping pong ball. It could be an orange. Anything. Tennis ball. Who knows? I mean, then you could just add your detail to it and it's going to look like a tennis ball. So I think the sphere is the hardest thing to draw. So yeah, if you're just starting to draw, focus on mastering basic shapes. Learn squares or rectangles. They don't have to be perfect squares. Spheres. Triangles, right? Terrible triangle. Triangle. These basic things that we learned when we were kids. And of course, a box is just a cylinder from an orthographic perspective. It looks like a cube. All right, it looks like a square or a rectangle. The cool thing is that if you can learn to use these, and obviously if you take a circle, you can stretch it out. It's more of a perspective thing. It's an oval, but it's just stretching a circle out. If you take a straight line, they do this on Drawbox, which is really great. And you kind of do one of these numbers. The further out you go away from the cylinder, the center, the wider it becomes. Because this is how perspective works. If you do it the other way, you start to see that if this were a flat disc, you can do this with a real flat disc, by the way. If you take it, put it on a string and cut a hole in a cylinder and just move it across your desk or whatever. It doesn't have to be on a string, but you can just move a piece of flat cardboard. I believe they do this on the site. You can move it left and right and you'll get, if your eyes don't move, you stay where you're at. The perspective is that focal point there. So you can kind of see how it fits into a 3D space. If this were like some kind of hallway or something. So just do, yes, a box. And then a cylinder. And a pyramid. And circle. Now circles, again, that can be kind of a pain, but if you just try to do one of these numbers, that'll kind of give you the effect that it's a ball on a table. And then this cylinder thing, this is kind of cool. If you heavier shade it as you go away from it, because of how perspective works, it'll give you the sense that there's like a diffuse lighting on this cylinder. And then of course you can't, if you can't see through this, you know, you get the sense that it's filling up 3D space somewhere. So, and cylinders can be kind of tricky depending on which way the light is coming from. In this case, if it's coming directly in front like that, you're not going to see a shadow because it's behind the cylinder. But if you wanted it to, you could, you know, you could make your cylinder light be like that. Something like that. And of course, it would be more washed out on this side. Still have a little bit of that shadow, but not much. And then it just gives you texture, gives you shading, gives you an idea of how things are going to look. And then again, it depends on where the light source is coming from and all that good stuff. And it also depends on the kind of texture it's made of, you know. That's just, it's light practice is all that is. You're just trying to get an idea of, so like if you shade this really heavily at the top up here, it's going to feel like this is empty and light's not hitting it, which could be, it could be an actual container, it could be a cardboard box if you were to draw a cardboard box. Right? It has like the, say this is the inside of the box. Not being very specific about this because I'm going to color it in, shade it in. But say like you had a box, right? This inside is going to be dark. And then you're not going to have this here. Eventually you get away from drawing the lines exactly. Like you eventually don't do this kind of thing. Eventually you're just going to end up drawing like the front of the face of the box and then where you think the perspective should be. That's the idea anyway. Something to that effect. All right, the reason for learning how to draw all of this crap. When you draw a box and then circles, and what is the point, right? What is the point of learning to draw two-dimensional objects and shading and all that good stuff? Well, there's a reason for it, I promise. Check this out. So if you want to draw an arm, let's say this is a really, really lazy way to do it, so, but it works for me. So if you're drawing, let's say the upper torso of a human being, right? Your rib cage looks a little something like this. You might draw a socket for the arm, which is just sort of a cylinder, or I mean, it's a circle. It's an circle on perspective, right? It's an oval. Then you might draw where the elbow is connected. Drawing these together that's just an obscure cylinder. If you just kind of contort the cylinder a little bit, you can get the impression of a bicep, say, and then the forearm kind of does the same thing. And then I'm lazy and I always make my hands this weird oblong style thing. The point of learning to do that is that all of this stuff is just circles and cylinders, obscure cylinders, but it's still, I mean, that's the reason that you learn the triangles, and that's your traps, right? Running out of space to draw a person here. But that gives you an idea. Listen, I'm not the best artist in the world. But look, you draw a circle, right? And you draw a triangle. And that's it. Just draw those two things. It's a basic shape of a human face. For cartooning, for comics, for whatever. You draw your cylinder, right? Connect your little lines there. You're almost like a triangle shape back here, if you can see. That looks to me like shoulders, a neck, and draw your eyeballs. I usually put the nose so I know where the center is. Earballs. But the point is, when you're learning to draw, if you learn to draw circles well and you practice them all the time and you connect shapes, that's a circle. There's a triangle, if you will. You could draw it all the way through if you wanted to. Then you could stop it there, which is basically just a little box and another little triangle. So a triangle, triangle, and a box. So you start to draw like the basic shape of a human mouth, for instance, with just triangles and squares. That's it. I don't know if any of this is useful to anyone. Hopefully it is.